Hey everybody, Michael Snyder, Pacific Northwest Weather Watch. Today is November 14th, and right now we're looking at the visible/infrared satellite imagery here. You can see the sun rising across the planet, see the ridge setting up over the Pacific Northwest here, and this is going to build all the way up until Alaska and the Yukon over the next few days, and we're going to keep precipitation out of the region here, but we will get some winds that will stir up our atmosphere, probably enough to remain from getting too stagnant across the area. We'll take a look at that here coming up. We'll look at the extended forecast as well. Looks like the storms are going to return as we get through later in November, and we'll take a close look at that coming up here in a moment. Now, taking a look here, you can see visible satellite imagery. See the low clouds swirling around some of western Washington, Oregon. You can see the snow-capped peaks out there. You can see some pretty good low cloud cover here for northwest Montana, Idaho, eastern Washington swirling around a bit here too as well. Eastern Washington, some of the valleys are locked in there. Also, kind of be a continuation as we go on in through this next week here of who gets some of these ventilating winds as this Arctic front moves down east of the Rockies. It will bring some high pressure across the region and bring a little bit of a gradient here, some offshore winds. Hopefully we can stir up this atmosphere enough so we don't get too stagnant across the area here. Now, taking a look at SeaTac, 6th straight day, no precipitation yesterday, again below average. We're going to remain precipitation free here for the next several days, and we're going to be playing catch up as these storms return later in November here, but we're already starting to get below average here for November across much of the Pacific Northwest. So looking at Spokane, you can see the cold front passage Thursday as this Arctic front stays mainly east of the Rockies, but it will stir up the atmosphere a bit. Breezy to gusty northeast winds that'll help clear out some of the valleys over there as well. You can see Purcell Trench is mentioned here in Spokane, Washington. That's a cold air conduit through the Rockies into eastern Washington there. Now, taking a look here, much colder again Thursday through Friday. This is off through Montana. Another Arctic air mass expected to slide south across north central Montana Thursday and Thursday night. Sub-zero wind chills possible. Probably drop a few inches of snow in some areas as well as that moves down mainly east of the Rockies again. So heads up if you're traveling eastbound out of Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. As this Arctic front makes its way south. Now, taking a look at the NAM3 cam here, this is 10-meter wind speed. You can see BC, Washington, Oregon here. We have some offshore flow going on here, so we're going to have some nice sunny conditions for many of us around the region today. Now, as we go through this week, you can kind of see this offshore flow continuing across the region here. Now, watch as we go on into Wednesday night and Thursday. You see some north winds come down here. This is that Arctic front moving down east of the Rockies. You see some offshore flow starting to occur across Washington here. Fraser River Valley starts to get going. Stampede Gap, some gusty winds. The gorge right on the Washington-Oregon border here. Nice sea level gap here. And you can see these offshore winds continuing across the area, coming across eastern Washington, down towards eastern Oregon as well. So that should help stir up the atmosphere a bit. So we're not going to get too stagnant across the region here, and that's a good thing. Not too much fog. Now, looking at the European here, this is visibility in miles. I'm just going to scroll through this here. You can see some low clouds. Afternoon burns off. Then you go overnight again. You'll see some visibility is getting a bit lower and again bounce back in the afternoon hours. And again, now you can see if you look closely here, this Arctic front kind of moving down through BC across the Rockies and mainly Montana here. Kind of gets hung up just north of Washington, might clip northeast Washington and Idaho as it moves south. But you can see we clear up pretty well here on the day Thursdays. We start to get these offshore winds. You don't see many low clouds around, so that'll be nice. Keep the stagnation at bay. Now taking a look here, 6-hour precipitation here. Again, BC, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana. Here's Alberta out here. You can see the storm track kind of pointed at southeast Alaska here. Don't get much precipitation until this wedge of cold air moves down again, mainly east of the Rockies. It brings some precipitation here to eastern BC. Some cooler air is going to try to filter into the region here, but that's mainly what we're going to get out of this. Some cool, dry days with this offshore flow through western Washington, Oregon, BC. As Montana gets some snow out of this event, so does eastern BC. Might clip northeast Washington, Idaho as well. But then as we go on through the extended a bit more, you can see the patterns start to change here as we start to get some of these Pacific systems back towards the Pacific Northwest. We'll look at that more detail here coming up in a minute. Now you can see the ridge building over the area now. This is the European dynamic tropopause here. Here goes our big ridge, but then you can see this big wedge of high pressure here pushing this Arctic air down towards mainly Montana again here, and this is that Arctic front, but this will stir up our atmosphere enough to keep us from getting too stagnant across the region here, and then hopefully we can start to return some of these Pacific storms our way. Now taking a look here, we've got European on the left, GFS on the right. We're zooming out a bit here. You can see the ridging going on currently as we go on into later or midweek here, later on in the week, you can see the good model agreement here with the big ridge setting up over southeast Alaska here and the Yukon, eastern Alaska, and then eventually this ridge doesn't hang out for long, so that's kind of a good thing. You can see it start to break down a bit here as we go on in through next weekend, and then we start to bring the troughing back towards the area here shown in both the GFS and the European model here, and you can kind of see that Gulf of Alaska troughing returning here. So we go out a bit more into the future here, things start to get a little bit interesting also. It's a fantasy forecast, but kind of interesting that you can see we've got the ridge setting up near western Alaska here. This would allow some colder air to start to move down in towards BC here and the Pacific Northwest. So kind of an interesting thing that at hour 360, the GFS and the European, at least as of yesterday afternoon, we're in some agreement here in this big pattern change coming up here through the end of November. So a good thing to see there. Now we're looking at the European control. This is the surface pressure map. Here goes our ridge currently. Now watch this. Look at this entire west coast of North America all the way up through Alaska and the Yukon Northwest Territories. Just big dome of high pressure dominating the area. Very little precipitation. Really the only thing is just going to be what's wrung out in front of this Arctic high as it moves down east of the Rockies here into Montana, then eventually down into central portions of the country. High pressure hangs out for a bit longer here, but then you can see the Gulf of Alaska troughing starts to get going here, and we start to bring systems back to the region. Windstorm effects, Haida Gwaii there, and as we move on to the future, now we're going to go and kind of look at this almost like an Arctic high dropping down through Alaska here with a cool northwest or north flow coming across Pacific Northwest. Again, that's a fantasy forecast, but we're just kind of looking out in the future a little bit there. Now taking a look at Seattle, Tacoma, you can see the cool crisp days here with some chilly overnight lows, and then maybe the Pacific storms start to return here as we go after the 20th or 21st there of November. This is the wind speed here for SeaTac. You can see that bit of offshore flow showing up here as we go through the day Thursday. A little bit of gusty winds, maybe some easterly gusty winds as we stir up the atmosphere a bit, but otherwise fairly light winds. Hopefully we don't get too foggy. It doesn't look like we're going to be too bad. And then you see the Pacific storm trains start to come back towards Pacific Northwest here as even some windstorms are showing up off in fantasy land here. Nothing to get too excited about just yet. We're just waiting and watching for now. Now taking a look here, this is 24-hour running precipitation total. You can see for the next 24 hours, nothing expected here across Pacific Northwest. And now as we go into the future a little bit, there goes that Arctic front. You can see it stretching down the east side of the Rockies. They're just kind of wringing out the atmosphere for whatever moisture is there with that very cold air. It does clip eastern BC, central and eastern BC there, so we could be talking about some snowfall all the way down through the Rocky Mountains of Idaho and Montana with that as well. And you'll see that ridge just in place here by the time we go into later next week. No precipitation expected here. And then you see things start to break down, and they look like they might break down with kind of a vengeance here. And the European has been showing a couple atmospheric river scenarios coming back towards the Pacific Northwest through the 10-day period. But again, we're in wait and see mode. We're not going to get too caught up in any details through the extended just yet. Things are going to be on the change and rapidly changing at that. Now taking a look here at a snowpack. This is one of the impacts that ridging has over the area. So you can see it slowly but surely starts to eat away at our snowpack a bit. As we go through Friday, you can kind of see that Arctic front move down as just a couple inches of snowfall to the pack here, but not really for the Cascades of Washington, Oregon, or down towards California. And then as we go on into later in the period here, you can see it being eroded away. Some of the lower elevations here, snowpack's going to get eaten up a bit, and then we start to return the storms as we go through the later period here, and hopefully we can rebuild that snowpack across the area again. Taking a look here, this is Northern Hemisphere. There's Russia, there's the North Pole, there's Alaska, Yukon, British Columbia, Washington, Hawaii, Pacific Ocean here. This is 10,000 feet. You can see the cold air over the North Pole here, and you can see the polar lobe that drives down. This is that Arctic front that's just going to clip us here, mainly Montana off through the east as this cold air gets introduced down into the lower 48 here. Big ridging. You can see it plainly here, that warm air at 10,000 feet all the way up across the north slope of Alaska there. This cutoff low kind of milling around out there, and then you'll see this polar lobe start to move back down through the Gulf of Alaska. So models keep showing this, so cross your fingers here if you want the storm track to continue to look like it's going to be pointed at the Pacific Northwest through the extended. But kind of a nice diagram there of what's going on as you're looking at 10,000 feet layer there above the Northern Hemisphere. Now taking a look here, risk of heavy precipitation, still highlighting this area after about November 20th, 21st, Pacific Northwest included, bringing the snowfall back potentially as well. So fingers crossed that we're going to get active again here. We just have to get through this ridging period. Hopefully we don't get too stagnant here coming up with this ridge, but it looks like we're going to have some winds moving across the area that should keep us from fogging in too badly and getting our air quality up too much, into the degraded quality as well. So fingers crossed there, but pretty unusual ridge coming across the area here. It's looking like more than a 1 in 10 year event across some of the area, Southeast Alaska and the Yukon, Eastern Alaska there. And we're going to be impacted by that as well. We're going to keep the storm track out of the area here for at least the next week before we start to bring that polar low back around and start to get the Gulf of Alaska troughing going again. So anyway, enjoy the sunshine while you got it. The storms will return. You just got to be patient and wait. And it's probably better that we're dealing with ridging now and this fair weather now if you're a storm lover versus like the middle of December or middle of January. So maybe we can bring the cold troughing back down to the region by the time we get really into the storm season, off in December and January. We can really introduce some cold air into the region here. That first Arctic mass that we dealt with was a little bit too early in the season to really bring any lowland snow across the area here. So maybe we can do it again in December and January. We'll have a better chance of lowland snow with it next shot there. So anyway, hope you guys are having a good day. Enjoy that sunshine out there. Click like, subscribe, leave some comments below. Thanks to all my members, my new members signing up here, all my new subscribers. And I'll be working on that windstorm series here over the next week or so. I've got a lot of information stored, so they're going to be coming out a little bit quicker now. I released one last night, and I'll link it here on this video so you guys can watch that if you want. But anyway, I will talk to you guys tomorrow, and we'll do this again.